Hey y'all, good morning. Today we're going to go back into chapter 9 and we are going to finish it out today. So there's only 2 more sections left, and the first one's called The Practice of Intentional Solitude, and the last section is called Women's Innate Ecology. So we're going to, they really go hand in hand anyway, so we're going to go ahead and go through these 2 sections together, talk about it a little bit, and then we'll be ready to move on after that into chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called Clear Water, Nourishing the Creative Life. So that should be inspirational, I hope. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the practice of intentional solitude, she references the part of the story where, and I actually don't remember this part of the story, but where the spirit child of the seal woman and the fisherman, the soul and the ego, he returns to the rock where his dad first saw his mom, dancing, and so he returns and he's sitting there. It says, in the gray mists of morning, the now grown child kneels on a rock in the sea and converses with none other than the seal woman. So this intentional and daily practice of solitude allows him to be near home in a critical way. So she's talking about that last part of the story there, and I love this next breakdown here. So she's talking about solitude. She's talking about being alone, but check this out. She says, long ago, the word alone was treated as 2 words, all one. To be all one meant to be wholly one, W-H-O-L-L-Y, wholly one. To be in oneness, either essentially or temporarily. That is precisely the goal of solitude, to be all one. It is the cure for the frazzled state. So I know that a lot of people can resonate with this. When you're with a toxic individual and you're very much entangled with them and in some type of relationship, that can be the most lonely feeling you'll ever feel in the world, to be with someone and to feel that depth of loneliness. So yes, it's not true that being lonely and being alone are the same thing, because they're not. So I just love this breakdown of all one. So maybe you can just carry that with you, and that can be your motivation, just to remember that, a lot of times we feel whole when we are in solitude. And she's going to get into why and what it means and everything next. So here we go. She says, solitude is not an absence of energy or action, as some believe, but is rather a boon of wild provisions transmitted to us from the soul. In ancient times, purposeful solitude was both palliative and preventative. It was used to heal fatigue and to prevent weariness. It was also used as an oracle, as a way of listening to the inner self to solicit advice and guidance, otherwise impossible to hear in the din of daily life. Women from ancient times, as well as modern Aboriginal women, set a sacred place aside for this communion and inquiry. Traditionally, it is said to have been set aside during women's menses, for during that time a woman lives much closer to self-knowing than usual. The membrane between the unconscious and the conscious minds thins considerably. Feelings, memories, sensations that are normally blocked from consciousness pass over into cognizance without resistance. So you might hear people talking about, like with regards to spirituality, it's kind of like the veil thins, in certain times of our life. When a woman takes solitude during this time, she has more material to sift through. So just knowing when to take that intentional solitude matters too. And I think it all comes from our intuition, and I think it's just as applicable for men too. I so wish that there was a book like this with regards to men, and the wild masculine. And I just think that would be really, really cool. Maybe there's one out there and I just don't know. If you know of it, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. So then she goes into in her experiences with tribal women all around the world, and how they chose certain places to go, and she says that they were used anytime, the places that the women would go to for this practice of intentional solitude. And she just kind of expands on that. And then she gets into a question. She says, how does one call up the soul? And then this is kind of a review of what we were talking about earlier. It depends on the person. There's many different ways to do it. She says, the rhythm of running, drumming, singing, writing, painting, music making, prayer, contemplation, standing still. And she says, even in entrancing moods and ideas. All are psychic summonses that call the soul up from its dwelling place. So it's just that method, different methods to reconnect with that deeper part of ourselves. She says, however, I advocate using those methods that require no props, no special location, and that can be accomplished as easily in a minute as in a day. This means using one's mind to summon the soul self. And I'm skipping around a little bit here. So she says a little bit further down, truly the only thing one needs for intentional solitude is the ability to tune out distractions. I totally agree. It's like we need to have some method to interrupt our busyness, and our daily routines. We have to intentionally interrupt that. And at that point we can assess, do we need to take a break? Do we need to reconnect with our inner guiding light? It says, it is also very good to practice taking solitude in a room full of 1,000 persons. It may sound odd at first, but frankly, people converse with a soul all the time. But rather than entering the state consciously, many fall into it suddenly or snap to and find themselves in it. I thought this was cool. Because it is considered such an untoward thing, we have learned to camouflage this interval of soulful communication by naming it in very mundane terms. So listen to this. So it has been named thusly: talking to oneself, being lost in thought, staring off into space, or daydreaming. Yes. Somehow the educational and business world has felt that such time spent at being all one is unproductive, when in fact it is the most fecund. I had to look that one up. I tried to look it up before I made this for you all. Yeah. It is the wild soul who channels ideas into our imagination, whereupon we sort through these to find which we will implement, which are most applicable and productive. It is commingling with the soul that causes us to glow bright with spirit, willing to assert our talents whenever that might be. So in addition to gaining information about whatever we wish to see into, the taking of solitude can be used to assess how we ourselves are doing in any sphere we choose. So, yes, she says we take vital soundings of our current conditions, and she names like examples, like where we can assess, different areas of our life, She says habitat, work, creative life, family, mate, children, mother, father, sexuality, spiritual life, and so on. The measurement used in assessment is simple: what needs less and what needs more. We are asking from the instinctive self, not logically, not ego-wise, but wild woman-wise. Remember, wild woman is that medial woman, which is the spirit child. It's all the same thing symbolically, which is the application and coming together of the ego and the soul. So it's kind of like, if you want to use it as an assessment tool, which she kind of says, we are asking, what needs less and what needs more from the perspective of wild woman. Well, then that would mean from your heart and your mind. I think that's how I see that, and I think leading with your heart is a beautiful thing. because our mind is so limited, and our heart, I feel like, is closer to that space inside of us that is part of the numinous, the numinosity, where we are connected with the divine. So that's just how I see it. We are asking from the instinctive self, not logically, not ego-wise, but wild woman-wise. And I would certainly not forgo logic. Let me just put that in there. I think it's a marriage of the two, right? The mind and the heart. Let me just reiterate that. What work, adjustments, loosenings, or emphasizing needs to take place? Are we still on proper course in spirit and soul? Is one's inner life showing on the outside? What needs battening, protection? Because sometimes you know, if there's things on the inside, you don't want to just throw it out there for everyone, right? Like casting our pearls. We are warned against that in the Bible. What needs battening, protection, ballast, or weights? What needs to be disposed of, moved, or changed? After a period of practice, the cumulative effect of intentional solitude begins to act like a vital respiratory system, a natural rhythm of adding knowledge, making minute adjustments, and deleting the unusable over and over again. It is not only potent but pragmatic, for solitude lives low on the food chain, though it costs something in intention and follow through. It has to be intentional, right? It can be done at any time and in any place. Over time, as you practice, you will find yourself designing your own queries to soul. Sometimes you may have only one question. Other times you may have none whatsoever and just wish to rest on the rock near the soul, breathing together. I thought that was a beautiful close to that section. So making that practice to convene with your inner guiding light, to take that solitude, that practice of being all one, with that inner guidance, making that a habit is something that I think that we can attempt to do just a little bit at a time, little by little. And I think that it's not something we can just flip a switch and immediately make it work in our life. It's almost like, I don't really know that you want to pencil it in. I guess you could start that way, to probably even just to prove to yourself that you can in fact step away from how busy you are. It can be done. And it reminds me of this saying that, I closed the book, but we still have the other section. Hang on a second. It reminds me of, I remember hearing about, I've lost my train of thought. I actually thought of a second example that it's not as good as the first example, but it's like we can always make time for what really takes priority. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I think sometimes we think we don't have time for things, but it's just a matter of prioritizing. That's really what I want to say. So let's look at the next section and see what it has to offer. So she opens the last section of chapter 9, which is called Women's Innate Ecology, by talking about that you can't kill the wild soul. That we, if we're playing out of cycle, or just working out of cycle, or whatever it is, if we're just not in balance in that way, it can tire us out. And that, remember that taking practice of being in solitude is not like a void, it's actually replenishing. So we can actually feel energized and revived. I know that, how often have you taken a vacation and when you get home, you're actually motivated to do some things that maybe you've been putting off, like chores, at home, projects and stuff like that. I know that for me, just taking a little break from how much I have on my plate sometimes, it certainly gives me motivation to just hit those projects hard when I get back. So, but she says the good news is that we can make the necessary corrections and return to our own natural cycles again. Yes. So it is through the love for and the caring for our natural seasons that this is important, listen up, that we protect our lives from being dragged into someone else's rhythm. If you're just joining us and this is your first video, everything that we're looking at in this book is through the lens of having experienced narcissistic abuse or being entangled with a toxic environment or person in some way, and coming out of it and then like getting back in balance and realigning yourself with your gut, where you're no longer going to ignore red flags in people, and refining your discernment. That's the lens we're looking at this book through. So I thought that was really important, right? So yes. We protect our lives from being dragged into someone else's rhythm. So that's motivation for taking that time in solitude. Because if we're too frazzled, remember, narcissists like to keep you frazzled. They like to keep you busy with nonsense, drama, with anything that's going to keep you from checking in with your gut, that's going to say, you know, this is a bad situation. They don't want you to think about that. They bombard you to keep you from doing that. So it is through the love for and the caring for our natural seasons that we protect our lives from being dragged into someone else's rhythm, someone else's dance, someone else's hunger. And boy, are they hungry, right? Never satisfied. It is through validation. It is through validation of our distinct cycles for sex, creation, rest, play, and work that we relearn to define and discriminate between our wild senses and seasons. And then again, she just reiterates, I love this. She says, we know that we cannot live the confiscated life. Yes, because that's how it feels when you're entangled with a narcissistic individual. It says we can live on land, but not forever. Not without trips to the water and to home. Overly civilized and overly oppressive cultures try to keep women from returning home. Too often she is warned away from the water until she is thin as a dime and dimmed in light. So she tries to be very inclusive with, you know, different global cultures, and, you know, she'll take a concept and expand it, you know, so a lot of this, you know, may or may not apply to you, but I like how she tries to bring in all different experiences from women around the world. And so, yes, so this right here, all this section here where she's talking about not being dragged into someone else's rhythm and not living the confiscated life, to me, what that means is, in order to protect ourselves, we have to self-motivate. We have to, with intention, create this habit of stepping back in alignment and getting quiet, even if that means, you know, time away from someone who's right in our ear, to assess everything. And so if you are with a narcissistic individual, or when you were with, you know, someone like that, a toxic person, they're not going to motivate you to take the time alone. You have to self-motivate. It has to come from you. You have to, you know, champion yourself. And so, and that's what your soul is calling you to do anyway, you know? So all you got to do is get still and listen and check in. So she says, but when the call for extended leave to home comes, a part of her always hears, has been waiting to hear. When the call to home comes, she will follow, has been secretly or not so secretly preparing to follow. She and all the allies of her inner psyche will restore her ability to return. This empowering process does not apply to just a woman here and there. It applies to all of us. Exactly. A lot of these concepts are, you know, just as important for men as well. And we are distinctive, you know, men and women, and the masculine and feminine, and they're both beautiful, and I believe meant to work together. But I just, like I said, I just really wish that, I appreciate her being inclusive, you know, with men too. I think it'd be cool to see a book like this for men. And so everyone becomes snagged by land commitments. Yeah. Yet the old one out in the sea calls everyone. Everyone must return. Yes, women and men too. So now she goes into talking about, like, it doesn't matter your situation. Essentially, that's what this next paragraph is I'm kind of summarizing for you. Like, it really just doesn't matter whether you're busy with a career, or children, or whatever you got going on in your life. It doesn't exclude the fact that you still need to take that time. So in closing, she says, Jung said, in reference to Carl Jung, it would be far better simply to admit our spiritual poverty. So even if you feel like you got everything going on in your life, or everything's pretty good, or whatever it is, in order to even have that motivation to return home, to our soul home, and check in, that has to be the first step. We have to admit that there is a soul poverty. It's like that's lacking. We haven't filled our bucket in that regard. We haven't. So she calls it, spiritual poverty. And there's just, you have to come to a place of admission that you have that need to check in. So when spirit becomes heavy, it turns to water. Therefore, the way of the soul leads to the water. And she's got a footnote on that. I'm sure that would be interesting. It says, the return to home and the intervals of conversing with the seal from the rock and the sea are our acts of innate and integral ecology, for they all are a return to the water, a meeting with the wild friend, the one who above all others loves us unremittingly, unguardedly, and with profound endurance. We need only look into and learn from those soulful eyes that are wild and wise and loving. And I think that was just such a beautiful description, and my note says descriptive of meaningful relationships, yes. The one who above all others, and really more than that, God, our creator, because I think that is that numinous part of us, that's a part of God, that spark of us, that's a part of the greater fire, or the droplet that's a part of the ocean. It's kind of like the all one concept. And I just think that that's so, what else could be more nourishing than that? And I think you're going to receive that same vibe from, someone who you are attuned to, who you are aligned with, who truly loves you. I think you're still going to be getting those same vibes from those kind of beautiful, meaningful relationships, the people that are meant for those places in your life. So I'm going to read that last part again. A meeting with the wild friend, the one who above all others loves us unremittingly, unguardedly, and with profound endurance. We need only look into and learn from those soulful eyes that are wild and wise and loving. So I just thought that was a beautiful ending to that chapter. So thank you so much. I hope that you have been inspired by this, and we'll meet back up for chapter 10, and that's called Clear Water, Nourishing the Creative Life. And I'm just going to flip through and take a look at that. She goes into a really interesting story here called La Llorona, I think. That's how that's said. The pollution of the wild soul, poison in the river, the man on the river. So she has a lot of water themes, which is cool. So we'll dive into that together. I hope that you'll join me next time, and I just hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you soon.